very warm welcome to tonight's Growth Tech event. I think you probably know, but my name's Les Green, Chair of the Entrepreneurship Group here at WCIT, and I'm going to be your host for about the next 90 minutes, where we're going to talk about two key topics for entrepreneurs. One is raising capital, and then the other one, of course, is sourcing talent. We've got three great presenters here tonight, all of whom have managed to not only start a business, but actually reach a very successful financial conclusion at the end. So it'll be great to hear their views on these two important topics. But before we get started, I'm sure most of you will know what we do in livery companies and have an idea about WCIT. But for those of you who don't, I thought it'd be best to bring along the master of the information technologist, Mark Halford, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for coming this afternoon. What does the master mean? Well, it basically means I am the chair for the year. The year is not a calendar year, but I start in October, and so I will finish in about 3 months' time. The Worshipful Company of Information Technologists is a livery company. Livery companies have their origins as the medieval guilds. And the oldest, I think I'm right in saying, started in the 12th century, or the first reference to it's in the 12th century, which is the weavers. There are now 110, and we are number 100, which you can either say is 100, but as we're all technologists and we probably used to binary, arguably we are number 4, but don't tell anybody that because they might get a bit upset. We are a membership organization with about 750 members. And most livery companies have what is known as pillars, 4 pillars particularly, and they are, first of all, fellowship, and that's the sort of friendship that binds us. We have quite a lot of social events, and we all make new friends once we join, and that's what enables us to run events like this, because we're all happy to work together. The second pillar, which is also represented tonight, is about our industry. And of course, our industry is the tech industry. And tonight is about people starting new businesses in the tech industry. And we have other links, of course, with various parts of the industry. The third pillar is education. And our primary links in education are that we support 2 schools. First of all, the Hammersmith Academy, which we co-founded with the number 1 livery company, which is the Mercer's company. And the second school that we support is the Lillian Bayliss Technology School, which is in Vauxhall. And finally, the 4th pillar, which is very important to us, is charity. And lots of people, when you ask them why they joined, they said it's about giving back. And the giving back comes in 2 forms. One is volunteering. And of course, the people here from the information technologists tonight are all volunteering. And the other part is giving money. Volunteering, we have, apart from the entrepreneurs, we are very strong in the arts sector, where we have something called IT for Arts, which supports many of Britain's leading arts organizations, including things like the Opera House, the British Museum, but also much smaller arts organizations. And we advise them on the use of technology and digital, the use of how to make the best, exploit digital resources. And we also have something called AI for charities, which we're helping charities use artificial intelligence, because we funded a couple of major artificial intelligence projects, which we're now spreading throughout the charity sector. We also are present in the digital poverty sector, and we are just joining something called the Digital Poverty Alliance. And you may or may not know that I think it's 1.8 million households in the UK have no or very poor digital connectivity, and we're trying to change that. As far as money is concerned, we give away approximately 150,000 to 200,000 pounds a year, some to charities that we regularly support, which we know as strategic partners, others on ad hoc applications that are made to us. during lockdown, we have, of course, our income has suffered partly because the financial returns on our investments have not been quite as good as they were, but that's largely recovered. But more because our income partly comes from events, which we hold in our hall and other places, and that's not been possible, of course, during lockdown. But our members have been really generous, and they've given us over £18,000 in substitution for not coming to events. And I'd perhaps just ask you at the end, if you've enjoyed this evening, think about making a donation to our charity. Very simply, if you go to wcitcharity.org.uk, press the donate button, and perhaps you'd make a donation. We'd be hugely grateful. Anyway, I hope we all enjoy this afternoon, and I look forward to taking part in this. I myself have been involved in being an entrepreneur over probably the last 20 years, and so I will be joining you and hopefully enjoying the presentations we receive. On that note, Les, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. That's terrific. Thank you very much indeed. Just before we get started, Growth Tech, again, for those of you who are not familiar with this, we started doing Growth Tech events about 3.5 years ago. This will be our 12th that we've held. And this year we've held 2. We had Growth Tech 11, which was back in March, which looked at the same topic as we have this evening. And of course, Growth Tech 12 this evening. The one at Growth Tech 11 was all about startup businesses. So it was for those very early stage companies. Tonight, of course, we're looking at later stage businesses and those which are looking to really put their foot down and move along. So that's why the people that we have this evening have been through that process and have got the experience to pass on their views. Right, we're going to kick off with the first presentation from John O'Connell. You will have seen the brief about John. He was involved with his own business, Staffware, many years ago, but now runs Scale Up Group. So, John, over to you.
Well, congratulations to Les and to you, Phil, for running a very successful entrepreneurs panel, which I chaired many, many years ago. And I've been grateful for the one man and his dog to have turned up to them. So you've way exceeded what I was able to achieve. I'm been given all of 10 minutes to go through this big subject. So this is a rather data-filled presentation. So please pick out information which you think is most relevant to yourselves. Before doing that, this is a disclaimer. So everything I'm about to say, please ignore. I'm going to be talking just a bit about myself very briefly. As Les says, I founded a company called Staffware, which was a forerunner of what became known as business process management. After 20 years, we became that overnight success, and we staggered onto the AIM in its first year, which was an interesting experience for both of us. But then we progressed up to the main London market before we were acquired by Tipco back in 2004, so a long time ago. And we hit the dizzy heights of what was then not called a unicorn, but we were valued as a unicorn in the dot-com era. Don't ask me what it was 12 months later, but we did successfully exit for over 200 million. So everyone seemed pretty happy, so long as they didn't buy in at the unicorn valuation. Since then, I went back to my roots, shall we say, after running a public company for so long. I thought I wanted to get back in touch with reality, shall we say. So I got involved with startups, a bit like Picasso, had 2 periods, startup period, which was very stimulating, very interesting, met lots of highly energetic, ambitious people. I wouldn't say it's the most financially rewarding phase of my life, but so therefore I moved a little bit up towards more mature businesses, but still early stage ones who were looking essentially for Series A type funding, or I had just got it where I was chairman of those as well. So it so happens about 16 companies I've chaired. I've invested in every single one, some AIM listed, but mainly private companies. And out of that came the conclusion that neither my time nor my cash was inexhaustible, but I thought it must be an awful lot of other people like me around who want to add something back, get appropriately rewarded for it, of course, but also contribute to the growth of the UK tech industry, which I think we're doing our own different ways. But just going back to the subject matter, I thought it'd be interesting for you to see 3 studies which have been released this month, what I'm calling the big picture. And each one of these tends to be pretty heavyweight, multi-page documents. So these are simply the headlines. As you can see, there are now 166 unicorns in Europe, 52 in the last year, and the valuations are stratospheric. So if you're working at the other end of the market, which is typically what I'm doing, this can be quite either encouraging or dispiriting that you feel your efforts are somewhat puny compared to the people who are now unicorns. So that was from the Titans of Tech study by GP Bullhound, released only yesterday. British Business Bank released their, this is non-tech specific, these stats, the second bullet point, but a substantial amount of money's gone into their definition of SMEs last year. But look at that figure for Q1 of this year. So there's been clearly a catch up, maybe a little bit of a delay caused by COVID, but so more than half of last year's has now been put in for Q1 alone. Deep tech, which they define as being very much original technology, including the life sciences, for instance, large number of deals done in 2020. As people who work in the industry will know, UK companies typically get less money than their US counterparts. And in this case, the figures were about a fifth. So maybe that's a bit disappointing, but frankly, to be expected. The whole of the venture industry worldwide is now investing staggering amounts of money, almost unbelievable. Just in 1 month alone, in May, $44 billion. And the last 3 months has averaged $50 billion. So when I talk to our clients, I tell them to ignore what's going on in the rest of the world and ignore even what's going on in the US, because it can be completely destabilizing and kill their ambition at birth if you're not careful. Or they simply say, I've got to go to the States, and then until they realize it's a completely different market with far more demanding requirements. And the check size from the fund needs to be multiple, which for startups in the UK and early stage businesses is just inappropriate. So some, I think, interesting stats at one end of the market. More relevant to us, or certainly to me, is what's happening at the Series A end of the market, which is when companies are really growing up fast in terms of they're now confronted by serious institutional investors who are a bit less benign, a bit less forgiving, shall we say, than friends and families and often angels as well. So these stats I've got from Silver Peak, thank you, Paddy Maguire, there, and you'll see that about 150 deals have been done in 12 months to the end of March. Interesting enough, about a third in each of these categories, so up to £5 million invested, then between 5 and 10, and then over 10. So quite a broad base. The average, you'll note, is about £7 million, which is, creeping up. At one stage, I always used to think up to 5 is Series A, but you can see there's more money now than there was before. But this still represents about 10% only of what goes into venture funding in the UK in any 1 year. And I'm beginning to think that this is a bit like a club. It's hard to get into this club, but once you're in it, there's a wall of money waiting to support you with second and third and maybe fourth rounds as well. But getting the first one is quite difficult. And it's one of those classic things. You won't get the job unless you've got the experience. But if you haven't got the experience, how do you get the job? You know, this can be a little bit of a catch-22 about these things as well. The next slide shows the trend by quarter. You know, considering COVID last year, especially, hopefully the peak is behind us, hopefully. But, you know, the funding has remained very resilient, all things considered. But nevertheless, you can see quite a growth in quarter one, both in terms of by number and also by value. That box on the top of the quarter one graph shows you that quite clearly, I hope. Then the next slide shows, actually getting down to more nitty gritty, who's actually investing. So these are the most active investors. On the left-hand side are the funds for the whole of last year, and then what they did in quarter one. And interestingly enough, there are 7 funds in 2020 which accounted for approximately 25% of the deals done, and another 7 rather, not always the same 7, account for a third of the deals done in quarter one of this year. So there are quite a few funds. It's, you know, I'd say there are at least 70 funds who posture themselves as being at least in Series A, but quite a few do very few deals in a year, which is kind of interesting, I think. Now, looking at it from the viewpoint of a entrepreneur, we did a study back in January, and we will refresh this, but the position hasn't changed much from my day. Remember, I was congratulated for at one time holding the record for a number of refusals before we lurched onto A. But it doesn't seem to have got much better. Some of the funds we surveyed claim that they see about 20 business plans a week. So that's approaching 1,000 a year. And if you look at the previous numbers, you know, the most prolific fund last year only did 7 deals. So actually that's less than 1%. But the stats on the left, you'll see that it's quite easy to get meetings with funds. And if you know many entrepreneurs, they'll say proudly, I've had a meeting with so-and-so yesterday or day before, it seemed to go extremely well. Frankly, and I've said this to the funds directly, a lot of funds use these meetings as their own market research to find out what's going on in the market. So they're being quite selfish, actually. But you can see the fallout rate is quite rapid, to the point of, on average, they say, and I think this is a generous percentage, 1% of the people they see actually get funding from them. So if you're an entrepreneur, surprise, surprise, in order to improve your very poor chances, you're going to end up having lots of meetings, most of which will be quite futile, talking to people who just are inappropriate in terms of their funding criteria compared to yourselves. So, you know, it's a very inefficient process still, regrettably. Scale Up Group is there, this is a plug, to actually improve that abysmal success rate. More relevant, I think, to today is the fact that after a hiatus, for obvious reasons, last year, we're reviving the Enterprise Awards, which I founded some years ago now. It'll be the 10th one next year. It's taking place the 10th of February, Goldsmiths Hall, and we hope to raise 10 to 20,000, hopefully 20,000 pounds for the WCIT charity. So please make a note and please support us. And this has now become known as the Oscars for technology entrepreneurs. It's highly personalized. and we put them through quite severe assessment before we give them any award. So Scale Up Group was formed of people like myself, many of whom are members of WCIT, and also household name type people such as Alistair Bathgate, founder of Blue Prism, Mike Tobin, who's known to most people, Paddy Maguire, Adam Hale, Richard Holway, so on and so forth. And all in their different ways are adding back to the tech industry, including we all invest personally alongside a fund. What we do is help entrepreneurs get funding in the first place. And secondly, more importantly, help them spend it wisely, quickly. And this is encapsulated in our handbook, which what our clients get. We're currently in fundraising for 2 such clients, one in the elderly care market and the other one in investigation case management, regrettably required even more than ever before. So in summary, there is a wall of money out there, no doubt, but it is something of a club to get into. Getting Series A funding is still extremely tough. And I reflected the other day that the sort of questioning and this due diligence, which has now gone through, is as demanding as it was when my company listed many years ago on AIM. So the entrepreneur really has to be properly prepared and be able to tick all the boxes to actually get that funding. But once they do, the cash is there, follow-on cash is there, and often it comes with smart money where people can actually add more than just money to their proposition. So hopefully, Les, that's set the scene for the next speaker. Thank you for your time and attention.
John, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take the liberty, if I may, of throwing one question at you just to start off. You've had that interesting claim on your slide there about having a 100% success rate.
Yeah.
Great. But would you say that's down to just careful screening of the businesses and trying to help them get their pitch right and everything else? Or is it due to the breadth of the contacts you've got or something else?
I often joke to our clients that if they can get through us, then getting the money ought to be a breeze for them. We are pretty demanding. We go through our own due diligence to make sure that they're worthy of investment. And I think the fact that our members are personally investing actually adds a little bit of an edge to it. So we see it both from the entrepreneur's perspective, but also from an investor's perspective. And we've now evolved over the last few years this CEO handbook, which contains all the templates for how you present to funds, covering we think everything they're likely to be asked of them. And we do go through with a fine-tooth comb their financial plans as well, and make sure everything's consistent and more importantly, credible. Yeah, so it's a pretty tough regime we put them through. Yeah.
Well, you will know as same as I do. Obviously, raising capital for companies used to be a relatively quick process. You could run through it in 3 or 4 months or something. But nowadays, I mean, getting through in 7 to 9 months doesn't seem unreasonable. Is that how you see the world as well?
I think so. Yeah, I think if it's done quicker than that, well done. But my advice always to our clients is allow 9 months and be surprised pleasantly if it's less than that.
There were 2 questions that we've got here, John, that I will just pass on to you. One is, what would you say are the top 3 issues that you spot in entrepreneurs raising Series A funds? Could you give us what you think are the top 3?
I think number 1 is their go-to-market strategy is the thing which they find most surprising, having to articulate in great detail. The old days of saying this is a $10 billion market, and if I get a fraction of 1%, we'll all be rich and famous, is guaranteed to turn off virtually all funds these days. they really want to get down to nitty gritty based upon your track record. How are you going to get the leads in the first place? What will it cost you? How many people do you need? Blah, blah, blah. And then what are your conversion rates? Marketing qualified, sales qualified. And then what's the average deal size? And how many salespeople, if you're selling enterprise type selling, salespeople do you need? And as importantly, how many support client success people do you need? And that end-to-end requirement is something which, frankly, when I floated, wasn't even touched upon. So I think that's number one. Number two is sustainability of their competitive position. You know, you may have a wonderful gee-whiz product today, but you know, how will that withstand competition? And don't forget that the competition, a bit like yourselves, are probably out there raising cash right now to do similar thing to what you want to do, or may already have the cash, you know. So how are you going to maintain that lead? And thirdly, as ever, is this quality of the management.
Sure.
And that's where it's highly subjective, because how do you know whether or not management can scale unless they've done it before? So it's one of these catch-22s. It's a very subjective thing to figure out people's scalability capabilities.
John, thank you very much. We'll come back with more questions for you, I'm sure, later on. But for now, I'm going to ask Dave Bryant, to give us his sort of views on finding talent. So Dave, over to you.
So a bit about hiring great talent. A bit about me, first of all. So I graduated in chemical engineering and joined cement manufacturing business, Blue Circle as it was in those days, and spent 4 years in production management there. I think I effectively went from university to being told to manage the manufacturing plant on shifts about a week after I started. So I think what I mostly learned was how to make it up as I go along. You know, I did that. Following that, I did 20 odd years at Mars, primarily in the pet care division, but at one point it merged with Main Meal, and I covered that area as well. Great thing about Mars was that certainly in those days, it was really quite easy to move around amongst the functions and get a lot of valuable experience quite quickly. So I joined in production management there, going from a very dirty cement industry to a remarkably clean pet care industry. Actually, the biggest canning plant in Europe at the time, quite an impressive operation. But following production, I worked in finance and HR, logistics, and finally in business change, managing a number of large business projects, primarily organizational ones and IT-related process change ones. After that, I spent 12 years at a company called Tactical Solutions, field marketing business. And in fact, Lorna will be speaking in a minute, but Lorna and I worked together at Tactical Solutions, and I'll leave Lorna to say the rest about it. And following that, I've worked for 7 years as an independent business professional, but included in it is the role as non-exec director at Red Wigwam, which is a technology-based recruitment business. So, finding great talent, no matter what business you're in, you do need talented individuals to make it work. There are businesses that don't need many talented individuals and some that need a lot, but no business actually works without some talent working in it. And the good news is that the talent that you need is out there, that there's lots of great talent. The less good news is it can be really hard to find sometimes, and hard to actually get that talent up and working in your business. So I'll talk a bit about all these things, but in order to get that talent in, you do need to market and sell your business and yourself. People can choose where they want to work, and really most people want to work in a great business. The great working environment comes from, I'm going to talk not just about hiring talent, but actually getting that talent in the business and doing a great job for you. And that can be challenging as well. So develop and nurture the talent once you've actually recruited it. So important points to remember. You need to invest time and commitment in the whole recruitment and onboarding process. And I don't think everybody recognizes that, but if you get it right, you will get a great return on your investment. Unfortunately, when you get it wrong, it isn't just the cost of paying the salary for people you've recruited who aren't good or aren't, you've not enabled them to be effective in your business. They become a drain on the whole business. They actually drag the business down if they're not people who really belong there. So if you do get it wrong, and if you do a lot of recruitment, you will get it wrong sometimes. It's never without the risk of getting it wrong. But if you do get it wrong, my advice is face into it and fix it in whatever way that means. So it is a process. It isn't just about doing a few selection interviews and offering somebody a job. There's a lot of preparation to be done in order to get it right. There is a selection process, which is likely to involve various forms of interview and so on. But there's a post-selection period. Particularly, I'm thinking of the period between making and having a job offer accepted and getting those people actually starting in the business. And if there are long notice periods involved, particularly, it's really important to keep the person you're appointing warm during that period of time. So making them begin to feel a part of your business, a few phone calls every week or two from the person who's going to be their manager or co-workers, involving them in key business communications and so on, so that when the time comes to actually start, and it might be 2-3 months in the past, they actually remember why they're joining this business. And finally, induction and nurturing, as I say, what's really important is that you do get these people into the business and get them up and contributing in a really strong way as quickly as you possibly can. And until you've reached that point, then the process of bringing talent into the business certainly isn't finished. So preparation, first of all, be really clear about what your recruitment drivers are. So just because somebody has perhaps left your business doesn't necessarily mean that you need to recruit a replacement for that. What is it that needs doing in the business that you believe you need to recruit somebody for? So take the opportunity to create constructive and innovative change in the business if that's appropriate. Generally speaking, I think change can be a great energy creator in a business, and when you've got roles that need filling, is a good opportunity to look at opportunities to change. So explore alternatives as well, improve the way that things are done. As I say, potentially look at developing existing talent by restructuring. So again, you can create a lot of energy by enabling people with skills that aren't being used effectively to begin to use those and for others to see that there are career paths through your business. And redesign jobs where you need to. Then in terms of identifying the sort of people that you need, get really total clarity on what skills, experience. Do they need to bring a network of contacts into the business? It's sometimes a great opportunity to bring in people who have got a different network to those that exist, which can be great from a sales point of view and other reasons. Are there principles and qualities aligned to those of your business? Again, it's an almost certain cause for failure if you bring in people who their qualities don't match up to those that the business aims to stick to. And do they just fit with your business? You don't want to recruit clones, but you do need people who are going to look and feel at home in your business. And then the question of how you employ them. So the world of employment changes all the time, but it's had a very accelerated period of change in the last 18 months, and I don't think that's finished yet. So full-time permanent is perhaps a sort of default option for some people, but do you really need that? Or would a short-term contract, an interim appointment work better? Does that bring some skills you need right now, but maybe the skills you need in 6 months' time are different, and then you can manage that through a change. Maybe part-time contracts. Clearly, we've got the issue at the moment of people travelling into offices an awful lot less, and part-time contracts are probably more viable now than they were when most people considered people needed to be in the office in order to be effective. So think about those. You can get perhaps, maybe not double, but you can get a different set of skills from 2 people or however many it might be into your business if you take that sort of route. And temporary resources. So, actually, is this really quite a temporary activity that you can go to different places to get temporary resources in quite quickly and at low risk? So the actual selection process, you need to find those great candidates. How do you go about that? Well, again, the world's changed a great deal from putting an ad in the Sunday Times or in the trade press. There may still be some roles for that. I'm not quite sure whether ads in the Sunday Times even exist anymore. But certainly social media provides a great many opportunities to enable communication, that you've got opportunities available, and clearly using networks, which networks are generally much broader as well because of social media now. So look at all the opportunities to find potential candidates. Create an attractive package, back to the same sort of story, an attractive package in all sorts of ways, correct salary, but working conditions, which may include a lot of working from home or may not, may be a great environment in an office that would attract people. And what sort of colleagues are going to be in the business that would make it attractive. So marketing the business and the opportunity and yourself as an employer, very important. In terms of assessing the candidates when you've identified them, again, crazy not to use technology to improve effectiveness in that area. So screening interviews, telephone screening used to happen a lot. It was all right, but I think Zoom would be significantly more effective. And now that everybody's familiar with that, be crazy not to use it, at least at the screening stage. But you may still want to use traditional interviews, and I certainly wouldn't reckon on hiring somebody under any normal circumstances without actually meeting them face to face and getting a feel for what sort of person they really are. And you might want things like group selection events to see people working in some staged but similar environments to those they'll need to work in the business. And involving others in the process. So wherever possible, don't do this all by yourself. Get other opinions is really helpful. After selection, stick to the commitments you've made during the recruitment process. If you said to get back to people in 10 days, get back to them in 10 days. It says a lot about what sort of business you are. Obviously, you need to go through the sort of legal bits and pieces, make the job offers, take up the references, right to employment, and checks and contracts and so on. So go through all those sorts of things. If you need help for that, then you know there are people out there who can help you with all of that. Keep that selected candidate warm, as I said, particularly during the notice period. If somebody says to them, I thought you were starting a new job, you know, what's going on? You want them to say something like, I can't wait to start. And I don't think they'll do that unless you've kept them warm. But also get off to a great start. At the end of the first day, at the end of the first week, when they go out and they see their mates or they go back and see their partner, you want the first thing they say to be, I'm going to love working there. And they'll only do that if you work at it. Induction, we're nearly there. Construct a plan tailored to that recruit and ideally get them involved in constructing that plan so it really does feel like it's tailored to them. And again, things like Zoom during that warming up period enables you to do those sorts of things without a great deal of disruption to anybody. Agree some key milestones so everybody knows where you're trying to get to on this journey, and keep reviewing those all the way through. Adjust that plan if necessary. If it's going too fast for somebody or if it needs to go faster, then accept that. If it's going too slow because there's something wrong, that's a different issue. But make sure that the plan's continuing to work. Document the key points of feedback is worthwhile. And as I say, to face into problems early on. So Red Adair, for those of you who don't know Red Adair, he used to be on the news a great deal back in the day. And this is a quotation from him. He was a sort of real life John Wayne character, a firefighter who put out gushing oil well fires and capped gushing oil wells. And I guess the point he's making is if you spend your life walking up to gushing oil wells and using explosives and the like to put them out, then you want to know that the person who's there with you is a professional. So it's worth investing in recruiting the right people.
Great, Dave. That's fabulous.
That's it, really. Thank you.
That's super. Yeah, Red Adair. That's a great name from the past.
Indeed.
Not you hear very often these days, but that's brilliant. I'm just going to, because there are a couple of questions, but what I'll do is I'll just ask one, if I may, and then let Lorna speak, and then we can bring the rest up in the group area. One question actually is very relevant here. When you're in it'd probably be more for an earlier stage company, but I guess it works for scale up as well. Would you think it's better to employ sort of heavyweight people who've been working in large corporations before, or get people who you think are good talent that are perhaps from smaller businesses but have got the right skills?
It's a very, very good question, Les, and I'm not sure there's a sort of A or B answer to it. I think there are potentially real problems with people who've been working in large businesses coming into fast-moving, flexible businesses. I think you've got to assess if you want to bring that sort of experience in, which can have real value, will they fit in or not? I am a huge believer in actually, I think most people have loads more talent than they're allowed to use. So I'm also quite keen on bringing in people who haven't had that experience and getting a way to find it. But having some of the others around in there is probably very useful as well, if they're right for the business. My dog is joining in.
Right, that's a great time to get you on mute then. Thanks, Dave, for that. We'll pick them up in a
Okay.
minute when you sorted out the dog. That's super. Right, bringing up the rear, but one of the most successful female entrepreneurs, I think, in the UK, Lorna Davidson. It's over to you. Very interesting when we were talking before we got started this evening. Lorna was in a people business before that used a bit of technology, and now she seems to be in a technology business that uses people everywhere. So it'd be very interesting to hear your story.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Lorna Davidson. I'm the CEO of Red Wigwam and have had the pleasure of working with Dave Bryant for a number of years. So I'm going to, first of all, go completely off what I was going to say and just talk a little bit about something that Dave mentioned and the question that Les tabled in terms of bringing people on the journey with you. And I think Dave will back me up on this one, is that the people that you start the journey with are very likely not to be the people you finish the journey with. So when you start as an entrepreneur and you start to build a business, you take people on that are right for just now, but actually it's quite difficult to take people on that are right for the whole journey that you're going through. And I think that's one of the things you do need to face into. I think the other thing that for me is really important, and this is one of the things that Dave will know, I've made a huge number of mistakes. And one of the mistakes I made when I set this business up is I brought with me probably the best team of people I'd ever worked with. However, they weren't all entrepreneurs. And I actually didn't think that that mattered too much. But when you were starting a business with a blank piece of paper, actually, not everybody could cope with that. So if I did something wrong at that point, it was I should have brought them on much later. So not everybody is an entrepreneur, not everybody can do the journey of a startup. So I think that is definitely worth remembering and thinking about. So I'm off course already, but let me tell you a little bit about changing work for good. So, it's not a huge surprise that attracting talent is difficult, particularly when you're a business that is maybe not as well established as other businesses. It's quite difficult to sell your story and sell your journey when actually that journey is changing quite often. So it's quite important in terms of being able to make sure when you're attracting people that you're clear about what your directives are, you're clear about what you're trying to achieve, and that people can actually buy into that story with you. But I think one of the big challenges we all have at the moment is keeping talent. So one of the things that has been really obvious, particularly coming through this pandemic, is that the employment market has changed for good. It's never going to be the same as it was. So staff are more demanding than they've ever been. They have had the time of lockdown to be able to look at their lives, look at their balance, look at whether they want to work in an office or work from home. They've had a little bit better sort of work-life balance. And lots of people are saying, actually, I don't want to go back to the way that was. And I think from my perspective, that's quite an interesting one, because that's saying, as employers, we need to recognize that and we need to make the change for that. In terms of, and Dave made the comment earlier about salary. Salary is obviously very important and everybody needs to live, but it's actually not the only thing that's important anymore. So culture, place and branding is hugely important now when you're employing staff, much more so than it used to be, particularly for Generation Z. They want to work in a business that they're proud of. They want to be able to talk about the values and purpose of the business. They want to be able to understand it, articulate it, but most important, they want to be able to fly the flag for that business. So it is hugely important that you're really clear on what those values and purpose of the business is. I think the other thing that is really clear is people want to be treated correctly. And it won't be a surprise I use the word flexibly, since my business is all about flexible employment. But actually being treated properly and correctly is hugely important, from everything from actually, they don't, we talk about the gig economy. People don't want to be employed in the gig economy. They want to be employed. They want to have their national insurance paid. They want to have pension contributions. They want to be treated the right way. When the people arrive at work for the first day, they want to feel welcome. They want to be part of the team, rather than, particularly in the industry we operate in, which is the temp market, where they sort of sit in the corner and just do that job today. That no longer is good enough. The other thing I think is hugely important is people want to know what their development plans are. They want to understand how they're going to be developed, how they're going to be nurtured, how they're going to be grown in their job, because they won't hang around if they're not. The other thing that, and I've written here, and so please do excuse my language, but one of the things that as a generation I was brought up on was you had to save 3 months' money. My mum and dad would always say to me, put 3 months' money in the bank, because if you lose your job, you've got to be able to pay the mortgage. Generation now put 3 months' money in the bank, but they don't use it to pay the mortgage. They use that to F off. If they're not happy, if you're not meeting their requirements as an employer, they will just leave. They'll go and, well, before COVID, they'd go and travel, they'd go and do something else before choosing another career. So hugely important that they have that ability, and are maybe braver than when I was around, but they have the ability to just disappear. I think employing people has completely changed. So if you think about the last year, I've employed staff I've never met. So Dave and I will have done lots and lots of interviewing together, but would have spent lots of time in face-to-face meetings. I have people that have been in my business for nearly a year and I actually still haven't met them. The big questions are, how do I manage those people? How do you manage them to make sure that they're inducted correctly? How do you manage them to make sure you're getting the most out of them? How do you, you know, we all do Zoom calls until we're blue in the face, but how do you really read their body language? How do you really understand what's going on? So particularly in our business, we have a team of fairly young people. And what I find is they can hold it together for half an hour on a Zoom call, but actually can't hold it together if you're sitting opposite them in an office for 8 hours a day. So it's about trying to really understand what's happening with them and understanding how to get the most out of them. But I think the one that I particularly have spent a lot of time thinking about and worrying about is, how do you develop the opportunity to create a culture with values and guiding principles when actually you're not together? So it's easy to say, well, I've produced a slide and I can tell you what those are. It's actually much harder to be able to live those values and live those guiding principles when you actually are not with somebody. And I think the other thing that we, again, have worked very hard on in our business is to allow people to find their voice. So when you're a new starter in an entrepreneurial business that's moving at pace, it's really easy to think you're the only person that doesn't know what's going on. And it's really important that you're allowed to find your voice and be confident in what you're doing, so that actually, as an employer, you're getting the most out of people. So finding that voice is a big one. One of the challenges we are facing, and I've definitely, like the rest of the world, haven't got this one right yet, but do we go back into the office? When do we go back into the office? And how do we manage that integration again? So we decided that we were going to do a soft launch back into the office. So we have had 2 days in the office, and unfortunately I've had to close the office again. So our office is based over in Liverpool, and the rates have gone up quite considerably, quite quickly in terms of COVID. So I've had to make the decision to close it. But it's that bit about, how do we all start working together? So I know from my own perspective, my first full day in the office, bearing in mind I probably worked less hours than I normally would, I was exhausted when I got home. So just that physically being with people all day, I found quite exhausting. I think the other thing that's really worth considering is how we treat our staff and how we reward them. So one of the things that we've looked at in our business is bank holidays. Bank holidays are important for families. They're not as important if you're single, if you have a different religion and you'd need different holidays off. So one of the things we've looked at doing is, should we roll our bank holiday entitlement straight into our holiday entitlement? So if you don't want to have a bank holiday off, you don't have to have a bank holiday off. And again, our team have really taken to that quite well. So also things like, you know, do we operate core hours? What do we do? Because actually 9 to 5 has gone and our business operates 24/7. So again, it's about allowing people to work when they want to work and doing it in the right way. The other thing that we do in our business, and you can tell that I don't do this, but my staff do, they really appreciate the ability to go to the gym during the day. And that is hugely motivational for them, that they can either go to the gym with a colleague or go by themselves. So again, we build that into the working day to allow people to be able to choose when they work and how they work, making a huge difference for them. I think just thinking about how you lead a team at the moment. So how you sort of attract them and how you keep them, but how you actually lead them in this really strange time. I think one of the most important things is you have to trust your team. And if you can't trust your team to do the right thing, they're not the right team. So I think you need to face into the fact that if you can't trust them, then actually they're probably not right. I think as leaders, we have to listen and watch much more than we ever used to. So particularly as entrepreneurs, we need to slow down a little bit and take a little bit of time to just, take in what's going on around us. But we have to also ask. We need to ask the questions that actually we might not always want the answers to, but we need to make sure that we do that. And I think the other thing is we need to be really open. So I think one of the things I've challenged myself with during the pandemic, particularly around my people, is to be open to do things very differently. So that's about hours, it's about family commitments, it's about how they behave, but it's also being open for new ideas. So as Les says, I run a people business in the same way as I've always done, really, but actually we're a tech-led people business. And therefore, it's about using the tech in the right way to allow us to get the best out of our staff and for them to feel as comfortable and able to operate in an environment they feel comfortable with. So I think as a team of leaders, that's the biggest thing we can do, is we can look to be really open. And that for me is how we hope at Redwood when we're changing work for good, but how I believe that all of us need to behave in terms of being able to deliver a work environment that attracts the right type of people, but most importantly, keeps those people in our workforces.
Lorna, excellent. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, Lorna, one of the things I'm going to do, because I'm not sure for those people who don't know about Red Wigwam, it necessarily comes across, but I'm going to try and summarize what you do, and then you can correct me where I'm wrong.
Okay, no problem.
Lorna's business is a workplace, really. It's a sort of marketplace in which you've got, on the one hand, large corporations that are looking for people on very short-term contracts. And on the other hand, you've got the general public who are looking for very short-term work. So, for example, if I've got a 9-to-5 job and on a Saturday I want to go to be a steward at a football club, or if I want to work a few hours in a pub on the weekend or something, or whatever it might be, if there are large employers who have got those types of work available and they're anything up to 3 months in length, then your marketplace is a place where those people can come together. But the critical thing is, as you said, they're being employed by your business. It's not like the gig economy where you're out on your own and if you lose the job, that's it. You're protecting those people and you're giving them the sort of rights that an employed person would have. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's very fair. So yes, so what we are is we're a portal that matches workers and hirers, anything from a 15-minute task to a full-time role. But it's a little bit like a dating site. So we've built a clever algorithm that matches based on skills, experience, also attributes. Are you likely to turn up for work on time? Do you have good attention to detail, etc.? And what we do is we allow our hirers the ability to tap into great staff, mitigate any risks, so they're not taking on lots of people themselves. They can, take them just when they need them, but actually give them the opportunity to grow their businesses. We have, last count, about 166,000 people on the site. Looking for work, and we have about 3.5 or just shy of 4,000 hirers placing work with us.
Yeah. So with that in mind, thank you, Lorna, for that. That's great, because the reason I asked that, or wanted to make that point, is I guess with that in mind, and then the plethora of other ways that people can apply for jobs today, like job boards and all sorts of things like that. It is still a role for recruitment agencies in the traditional way, because I think that's what most of us would think first and foremost. If we wanted to get a contract or something, that's where we need to go.
I think it's a really interesting question, because I think it's changed. So I think if you want to be the CEO or the MD or the sales director, I think traditional recruitment agencies will always have a place. However, I think for the rest of the marketplace, it's about speed. So that traditional where you send your CV off, it would sit on somebody's desk, they then scan it, they then write to you, that's all gone. What we absolutely recognise at Red Wigwam, if we don't onboard a worker within 4 hours, chances are we've lost that worker. And so that onboarding process includes everything from proving their right to work. So it's quite an intense situation we put people through. But, We were joking beforehand about, John was mentioning that entrepreneurs don't have the longest attention spans. Applicants have an even shorter attention span. If you can't get them quickly, then they'll move on. And they'll move on because there's plenty of other things around. So without a doubt, I think the market has changed, and I don't think it'll ever go back.
And I mean, in terms of then in that situation, if you think about a CEO of a company who is looking at the recruitment process, and Dave, you might want to come in on this as well, what percentage of their time in that sort of scale up environment, what percentage of the time do you think they should be thinking about recruitment, be that retaining staff or finding new staff or whatever? Have a think about that?
I think they should be spending lots and lots of time thinking about their people, whether it's just about recruiting them, but generally thinking about how they're going to take people on a journey, I think is hugely important. And I think when you're in a startup position, you're as good as your team around you. You need to have a team that you can trust, that are dynamic, that are moving with pace. And so therefore, I do think you have to spend a lot of time thinking about people. I don't know what you think, Dave? You're on mute.
No, yeah. John, if you want to unmute as well, you come in as well.
If I had a pound every time I said to Dave, you're on mute.
Well, luckily my dog's asleep now, so I can unmute safely. So no, I would agree, Lorna. I think absolutely, you know, I don't care what your business is, people are incredibly important to it. I think, you know, it depends on the scale and structure of your business. So as a CEO, you have an awful lot of things to do. So in terms of recruitment, you may well have a number of other people who are heavily involved in it. So, you know, again, I couldn't say how much time I think, but thinking about people is incredibly important because, you know, you can only do so much yourself. You need good people around you helping you drive the business.
Can I ask you, the three of you, and John, I'm going to start with you, but I want to relate it both to the funding side and also to the talent side. John, you and I know that when we're looking to raise capital for companies, we often look at the background of the people and say, what successes have they had? But what about the failures? I mean, in America, it's a badge of honor if you've had at least one or two failures, but it doesn't seem to work that way here. So how do you play that one through then from the point of view of raising capital?
Well, you try to position the failure that it's outside their control in any way. It was, you know, unfortunate rather than, you know, some fault of them. Because you're right, it's not the same culture at all. And there's no point in moaning about the wrong culture. I mean, you've got to play the game according to the rules you're of it, and the rules are different in the UK. So, and you know, amusingly, of course, when Brits go to the States, they start telling their war stories, which are typically about the failures, and the Americans look at them as if they're nuts. I mean, why would you even talk about this? They're thinking, because Americans all believe they were born, you know, as Superman or Superwoman, and can't understand anyone who doesn't talk that way. So I think it's a cultural challenge. But I think when you're probing, if someone isn't honest with you and gives you the reasons why, that's definitely a red flag. If they can't admit to it, you know, once they got through the, pardon the French, the bullshit phase at the beginning, then to my mind, they're a no-no, and I wouldn't consider them because no one's perfect, and you really want to know the total person.
And Dave and Lorna, I guess it's the same in the recruitment world, isn't it? I mean, there are going to be some people who get bad references or so on. Can you get past that, or is that the end of the line then?
So we do it a little bit differently at Red Wigwam. So at Red Wigwam, we get our hirers to rate our workers. So what we find is that certain people won't be great at every job, but they'll be great at something. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's about finding the thing they're great at and then only making sure we match them to that. So I think that makes a big difference. It's about trying to recognize where people's skills are and making sure you're playing to them.
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, you can get past bad references. I mean, these days, if you take up traditional references, they generally don't tell you very much anyway. Yeah. So, the reality, I think, is there is a massive skill in the interview process and trying to get behind what people are telling you. And, the more of it you do, I think the better you get at it. But as I said earlier on, you're still going to make mistakes. But I think I've made mistakes with people who appear to have a perfectly good track record, and I've made mistakes with people who look like they've had problems, but some of those have turned out very successfully. So I think you assess the person in the round.
Les, I'd like to chip in on something else which was said about people not being able to last the journey. At one stage, funds assumed they were going to have to fire the CEO, founder. In my experience now, that's the last thing they want to do, because they recognize that with that founder comes tremendous passion and unique set of skills, which may not be best employed as a CEO anymore. But if you can be clever enough and persuasive enough, you can reposition that person so they're still playing a part, or at least they can depart gracefully, which says a lot about the business to everyone else who's working in that business. So I think it's the last resort that the founder gets fired. And I just adding up my experience when it went from a startup to a listed business, which is a pretty tough journey for many people. It was about a 50-50 retention rate of the original people in my core team and newcomers.
So not quite the old Jack Welch situation of drop the 5% every year, but there we go.
Yeah.
One question that's popped up was, do you have any advice on how to recruit and retain talent in a remote-only company? Because there's certainly plenty of those around, and probably more as we're going along in the future.
Well, I think if you look at my business, it really is a remote business. Yep. So I think we work very hard at that in terms of building communities. So we have to build work teams in very different ways than you normally would, particularly with our vast number of temporary workers. We don't always get that right, because what happens is you get it right for so many people and then you realize that you've not quite got it right for everybody. So I think the challenge is to keep doing it in lots of different ways. We have done all the things you would expect during lockdown. So we've done the Zoom quizzes, we've done the, I've even played charades on Zoom. So, there's not much we've not tried on to try and help that. But the biggest thing that I think has helped us is we have a weekly stand-up where we talk about the strategy of the business, what's good, what's bad, what's working, what's not. And we make that as open and as inclusive as possible, so that people, although working remotely, do have the opportunity to have their voice, but also to ask those questions sometimes you wouldn't like to answer.
Absolutely. Agree with that. John, one point about you in terms of at the point at which you're at scale up, the gaps that you might have in the management team. I mean, you're likely to have the CEO, who's probably the founder of the business, let's say, and there might be, I don't know, a CTO if it's a tech company. But the other roles, the critical ones like the CFO or head of sales or something, are they usually in place by the time you're at that scale?
CFO may be a part-timer, and it's one of the easier roles to fulfill, I think, because it, you want a qualified accountant typically in the role, and so that's the sort of starting point. And those sort of people are less inclined to try and pull the wool over your eyes than maybe the head of sales. Head of sales, I think, is probably the most difficult role to fill. And our clients, we run these CEO forums, as I mentioned earlier, and it's the perennial issue now of how do you find good salespeople from the head down, head of sales downwards. And typically a founder will be either a super techie or a super salesperson. And often the founder is actually doing the selling and transitioning from founder-led selling to professionalizing it. I think it is a very tough ask. And for some funds, it's a red flag if the head of sales is not already in position, because it represents a risk.
Dave, when you were working in this area, did you look to try and build a team of people? Is it all about the dynamics of the team, or can you still drive this with just individuals who are really good at what they're doing and forget about the dynamics?
I think teams are incredibly important, and it is very challenging. It's recognizing in the recruitment process, as well as then the way you manage that team, recognizing that you're not just recruiting a skillful individual. They've got to be a part of that team, and teams are really complex things. I think it's interesting, slightly going back to the earlier questions, that in Tactical Solutions and before, Lorna and I were involved in managing teams of salespeople. 90% of our employees were salespeople, because we were providing third-party contract sales teams to grocery manufacturers. And so our whole business was about managing a huge number of remote people. And it is really challenging. And I said about making mistakes before. We probably made loads of mistakes, but in fairness to us, managing a huge number of salespeople and recruiting the right ones there is a pretty challenging job. But yeah, I think teams, very, very important.
David, on your induction point, which is a lot of good stuff there, we published an induction program, and for salespeople, there is a pass or fail point, early on in their induction, to do, because selling is a high stress business typically. And there has to be, I think, some end points, and if they can't cut it after giving enough time and support, I think it's best to do it, because, as you know, it can be very expensive to employ an underperforming salesperson.
Totally agree, John. I think, it's very easy to let it go on too long. And certainly in Tactical Solutions, we developed a very structured sort of way of getting to a point where we said, is this working or not? And everyone understood that was the process when they were recruited, and people needed to be able to perform. You're dead right. There are a few things more expensive than an underperforming salesperson. So and it goes, it's interesting, it's very true about salespeople. It is true about other people in the organization who might have contact with customers as well. So, I've chosen to take my business somewhere else quite often, simply because, the person who answers the phone is no good. And the trouble is, you take an impression from that. So, salespeople particularly, but anybody who has contact with customers are really important to the success of the business.
I take that a stage further, because we run development teams. They might not have contact with the customers, but they've got to understand the customers. So the tech has got to be customer savvy. And so these development guys have got to recognize who they're dealing with. Because sometimes we talk about shiny balls, they get very excited by all these great things, but actually it's not what the customer needs or wants.
Les, I think one of the things we should mention is share options. To my mind, it was one of the primary drivers in Staffware's success. It's not everyone in the organization either had actual shares or had options. Everyone. And you know, when, of course, when you're a public company, it can be double-edged. Whenever every day you can see what the share price is. But for more senior people, I evolved a formula which was also a lock-in, so it's partly a rewards. But I would work out, could I get to at least 4 times their annual earnings, at least? In some cases, it was a multiple of that, which would deter them from thinking about going elsewhere. And as importantly, as we got more famous, you know, a lot of headhunters were trying to poach some of my key staff.
Yeah.
And when they realized what they could be leaving behind, that caused them to think twice about it.
Couldn't agree more, John, with that. I suppose the only double-edged sword, which I've also seen, is when the company does eventually go public, and then these people have benefited from a wall of cash. It's often after the listing that people then disappear, which, you know, that's the only downside to it. But yeah, I mean, in principle, by then you should be able to afford the people that are ready for the next phase. So that's really the case. Yeah, I mean, actually, one just thing that's slightly outside of this, and then we'll try and bring all of the thoughts together. But a question that came up earlier, John, and certainly it's something that we find often at the scale-up stage, is using debt as opposed to equity. Are you involved in both of those aspects, or do you tend to just stick to equity?
Well, we tend to stick to equity. Debt is seen as an interim step, although you've got this perverse situation when it's easier to get debt once you've raised Series A equity, which is it's a bit like, you know, the bank will offer you the money when you don't necessarily need it, you know. And even nowadays, we're seeing some lenders asking for personal guarantees, which, speaking from bitter experience, I would not recommend anyone sign up to. Yeah, but it's a valid step to look at. You know, look at debt providers who typically want a bit of an equity kicker themselves. Interestingly enough.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, during this last 18 months, and you alluded to this earlier, Lorna, we've obviously seen a really big change in the way that employment and teams and people actually work in an office are sort of put together. And who knows, we hope at the end of next month, then the transition might just start back to some degree of whatever the new norm is. So I guess what I'm looking for is, at the one end, we've got Goldman Sachs who want people in 5 days a week. And at the other end, we've got tech companies like Facebook who say, knock yourself out, work from home, as long as you're delivering, that's fine. Are we going to get something in the middle? Are we going to go back to 5 days? Is it going to be something that will change over time? Just wondered what you all thought individually about that, really, and the impact that might have not only on the team dynamics, but also, you know, in terms of financing those businesses. Lorna, what do you think?
I think we'll go to a hybrid model. So I think we will all benefit from having a home. So having a head office, somewhere people can go and meet other colleagues, I think is really valuable. But I think we've recognized the value of not having to commute all the time and working from home. So I think we'll have a hybrid model. I think that's where we'll go to. The challenge for leaders of businesses that operate like that is about, how do you get people together? How do you create the team atmosphere when somebody's always sitting at home? How do you make sure that you've got a balance for the whole team and people feel like they're part of a team rather than somebody being out by themselves? So I think that's the challenge. And personally, I'm excited about that hybrid model. For somebody that's spent their whole career working in an office, I've genuinely found some real advantages working from home.
John, what about yourself?
Yeah, I entirely agree with that hybrid model. You know, and also remote working. You know, I think it's, relatively speaking, easier to outsource some functions of the business. Technology development, you know, product development, which has been going on for years, outsourced or done remotely, is easier than some other functions. But hybrid must be the way forward. In terms of the cost aspect, if everyone comes into the office at the same time, of course, you still need the same amount of space. So then you've got to figure out this tension between getting everyone together and trying to save money, which could be, where do we all go type of thing. But I'm sure there are ways around that. Yeah.
Anything to add, Dave, on that one? Or
not a great deal. I'm going to agree with Laura and John. I think it's a good point. I think getting, building the team, is important. I think getting everyone together sometimes is very helpful to that. I guess, the providers of office space will find a way, because in principle, you don't need much of what you normally used to need in an office. If you can work from home, you can stick your laptop in a bag, and when you get there, you've probably got what you need. So, the space doesn't have to be the space that belongs to your business. It can be different places.
I mean, just playing devil's advocate on that, I suppose the tricky bit is that we've heard a lot tonight about how important it is to get people to work together and the team dynamics, and then sort of buying into the positive aspects of I love to work here and all that kind of stuff. But of course, that's incredibly difficult. And from a management point of view, I think it's going to be very hard to change the way that management actually deal with staff to achieve the same objective at the end. And I think also there might be an age differential here, because if you're somebody in your 20s, or if you're maybe Generation Z or whatever, you're going to perhaps want more interaction with people than perhaps for people who are more self-sufficient later in life, want different things. And that ability to do the hybrid model might be of more benefit.
Yeah, I certainly think, there will be people who, for various reasons, won't want to work from home because they haven't got the right space or the right amount of quiet time or whatever it might be. So I think, probably most businesses will need to make workspace available. And you're right, maybe people in their 20s or whatever will spend more time, working there than some others. But so I think, there's flexibility around that. But absolutely, yeah. I think young people want to socialise with their colleagues more.
Well, I'm not sure they need to socialise at work though. So I think this is all about our work-life balance. I think they will get used to working remotely, but actually they'll have to take their social life elsewhere as well. So I think you'll see a difference in terms of how we all behave.
Yeah, I think it's just
the bigger challenge is can the leadership change their roles?
correct. Yeah.
And go from being brilliant doers, wherever doing is, technology or sales or something else, to being tremendous leaders. And that, to my mind, is the biggest challenge for any scale up.
Well, we are sort of heading towards a close now, but I really appreciate all your input, John and Dave and Lorna. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a very interesting discussion and debate, and we've covered a lot of ground there. Thanks again, everyone. We hope to see you soon, maybe at GT13.